Hey everyone, this is a video I wanted to do for a little bit, for some time, I guess, but haven't had a chance. But it's right now, it's like towards the end of the year. Everybody's looking back at the year, this year, for how the mango's grown, how the grafting has worked out. And during this time, I guess I get a lot of questions about, like, I tried grafting, all my grafts failed, or maybe I got 1 out of 10 take, and kind of what went wrong, right? So this video is going to kind of give you guys a bit of different tips in terms of what I've learned over the years in terms of grafting mangoes, right? So just a little bit intro about my experience with grafting plants. I think I've been grafting for pretty much close to about 25 years or so, around that time, about 25 years. And back then, I just kind of self-taught myself from book illustrations. There wasn't like YouTube or anything like that. There wasn't any kind of YouTube videos, anything like that. There was the internet, but it's mostly was just scan illustrations of different grafts, and that's where I kind of taught myself how to graft. And during that whole time, my grafting techniques in terms of what I use didn't really change that much until the last probably 3 years of grafting mangoes. So prior to then, I had pretty good success with grafting. Even with mangoes, I grafted pretty successfully, and I just kind of use whatever I have around the house, and that included like I didn't have a grafting knife. I used just like a razor blade. I use saran wrap, for lots of my grafts, and for the most part, that worked out really well. Everything pretty much takes pretty well. Mangoes was always kind of like a maybe 60-70% take on my mango grafts on that. And then the last 3 years, I began my kind of collection of mangoes, getting different varieties. And that's when I started getting all these varieties shipped, and then my take rate was so low. I actually began to question myself in terms of like, what was I doing wrong with my grafting. I even upgraded all my equipment, actually began using a grafting knife, began using much more high quality grafting materials like buddy tape and so forth like that. So then that's when I update all my kind of tools and stuff, and I still got very low graft takes on mangoes. And it took me like at least a year or so to figure out what was going on. So I'm going to give you guys some tips on it. And the very first tip on grafting mangoes, and this is probably the most important tip of all, is that you have to get yourself some very fresh or local scions. If somebody's shipping you scions, for the majority of parts, it's always kind of coming from Florida or so forth. They gotta prep it and ship it that day, or they at least have to kind of prep it and prepare in a proper way in terms of like cutting it and then wrapping it with paraffin or wrapping it with buddy tape and then shipping it to you. My experience with all these shipped scions from Florida is that I gotten such a low take rate. I'm talking about like 10 to 15%. So like for every 10 grafts, I get maybe like 1 take or something like that. And I was doing this for about 2 years, right? Ordering all these kind of scions from Florida and grafting it. Sometimes I would get like 15 scions, and maybe I get like 1 or 2 take. And there was sometimes maybe I get like 15 scions and I got like maybe 10 takes, But overall, on average, my take rate was so low. And I initially thought that maybe mangoes was harder to graft, But I had pretty good experience with grafting mangoes in the past. What I figured out is that these scions, they're just not fresh enough, Unless whoever sending it to you is cutting that day and shipping it to you, I would like not really waste my time with it. But sometimes it's the only source that you can find, right? But just know that when you do start off with those shipped scions, it's a bit challenging already, and if take is not if you're not getting these good takes, that's the reason why. It doesn't have to do with your skill set in terms of grafting. It really has to do with the freshness of the scions and how well it was prepped for you when it was shipped and stuff. My own graft takes right now, I'm grafting from my own trees, from my own potted trees, from my own soils. I get nearly like 100% take. It's definitely over 90% take. So mangoes are not that difficult to graft. It's just finding quality materials to graft. We are in California. It's easy for me to say that finding local sources, but it's very difficult to finding local sources. And I know I've been kind of doing this for the last 3 years, and there's only been like there's only been like a couple people that has ever really been able to share really good quality scions with me. Most people who's growing mangoes here, like, there's probably like, a handful of people that has like old mature trees of named varieties, but most people have smaller kind of bush-like trees. They can't even sacrifice the size or the scions lots of times. So it's hard finding local scion soils, but that's my recommendation, even though I know it's probably be difficult for you guys to find, but it's getting fresh and local scions. That's the very first thing. The next thing I would say is once you do get these scions, even if it's local source, if it's ship source, if it's like wrapped in paraffin or something, I like to remove it and stuff. And if it's not wrapped and stuff, that's it's fine too. But I like to disinfect all my scions. Even if it's my own tree, I like to disinfect it. You could spray it with fungicide and dry it out. You could spray it with alcohol and dry it out. I use a little kind of spray bottle, and I would just spray it and then pat the scions dry before I graft any of it. So that's my recommendation. Make sure you disinfect these scions too, because of how fungal prone mangoes are, it's really highly recommended that you do that. Okay, the next tip I would recommend for you guys is use buddy tape. And buddy tape, it's a little bit pricey, very pricey compared to parafilm. I think this roll buddy tape is usually like 25 to maybe 32 bucks. You can only pretty much find it on eBay. It's usually shipped from Japan, and it's like this brand that says, it doesn't say buddy tape. I'm not really sure how the name buddy tape came from or the translation or anything. It's a Japanese product, and you can see this right here. It says Aglis, and it looks like this. Let me pull out the tape. Looks like this, at first glance you're like, oh yeah, it looks just like parafilm, so why is it like 3 times the price of parafilm, right? Like with parafilm, it's more like just kind of like plastic kind of taping, right? With this buddy tape, it's almost like how I describe it to people is that it's almost like plant skin. When you wrap this on like a plant, a scion, it kind of sticks to it like skin, but it allows the scion to still push through it easily. It's very kind of flexible, breathable, and when you're using it, you kind of stretch and wrap. So buddy tape, I really highly recommend it. It is pricey. It's a must to me. It's pretty much a must-have for like evergreen kind of tropicals, but for like easier to graft plants like stone fruits or anything like that, you could just use parafilm easily. You might not even need to use parafilm and you get good take. But like for mangoes, I highly recommend this because it's pretty flexible. Lots of times I use parafilm. By the time sometimes it takes a little while for scions to push, then the parafilm gets all brittle already, and this kind of just holds on. And it's like I said, it's almost like plant skin and not like tape. That's how I would describe it to you guys. So I recommend you're making lots of grafted mangoes to invest in buddy tape. Okay. Next tip. When is the best time to graft, right? So the best time to graft is when our nighttime temps are above 60. That is pretty much the best time to graft. Most people have found pretty good success in also in like early spring or like beginning of fall. You know, I had success on both various different times, but for most people, they have had success when the nighttime temps has gone a little bit higher. My recommendation for that is that it's kind of based on your locality and where you're at. It's also based on, I would say, where you're getting your sources from, right? So when I'm getting my sources from Florida, usually the spring scions that the Florida has is usually pretty much at its most healthiest, I guess. It just kind of finished blooming, and then the buds are beginning to kind of swell up and push, and it's like a nice, they got all this energy for kind of this vegetative growth. So that's like a Florida scions. When you get it in spring or spring, I like to graft it then too. Sometimes lots of time my nighttime temp isn't even above 60 yet, but I get good takes on it, and I do a simple cleft graft on it. If you're getting local scions, right, that springtime is probably not the best time to get any kind of local scions. We're still trying to figure out if our plants are pushing out blooms or vegetation. So initially it's after that first vegetation when the leaves have matured, and if it begins to swell up again, and usually that's, I would say, like around summer, and then you probably get something kind of late towards the kind of fall too, when there's a lot of scions available. So those are the two best times where you can find sources for it. You know, but ideally, you know, if your nighttime temps is high, it's probably the best time to graft. Okay, so that's my recommendation in terms of timing for grafting mangoes. Next thing, it's important, but I don't think it's that overly important. It's good to have because it does improve your success rate, but that's just using dormant versus active buds, right? So let me show you what is an active bud. Look at this right here. Look at this bud. It's all swollen, you know, even on top one, but you can go below it. You see below it, see how swollen that bud is? That's when it's like really nice and ready to graft, and that just depends on the timing and how aged the growth has been, how mature they got. But these would be like really ideal scions to use for grafting. With that said, I have done lots of grafts with just dormant buds. You know, what makes the biggest difference is probably shipping. If you're shipping this or receiving shipping from somebody, it's already difficult enough. You need these active buds to ensure kind of quality success. But if you're kind of getting local scions or your own trees, I've used dormant buds all the time. And this is one where I would say that's more like a dormant bud. You don't really see the swelling or anything that's on it. But I've used this tons of times. I used it before I really knew much about grafting mangoes, in terms of the last 2 years, where I kind of learned quite a bit about it. You know, how people recommend this swollen buds and everything, but I've used dormant buds in the past too. The only big difference I would say is when you use a active bud, you get a faster push take right away. You use the dormant buds, it might sit on there longer and then push, but in terms of success rates, it's pretty much about the same, in my opinion, as long as it's fresh scion source. And again, I said, if you're getting shipped scions, it's almost a must-have to kind of get these swollen buds, or else your take is pretty low. But if you're kind of local, like I said, dormant buds work too. I've done it several times, especially if that's the only thing I have available, and it just takes a little bit longer to push out. Next tip is when did you graft it onto the rootstock, and when did you decide to graft it onto the rootstock, right? What I see lots of time is people are grafting into very, very young rootstock, and you know, it's tempting, right? Like even if you do know that you shouldn't do it yet, it's kind of hard not to do it. So like this is the size of rootstock where it's still too young. You know, people are still too young, but people are always grafting onto it right away. And what happens when you graft a mature scion onto one of these smaller rootstock is that it's gonna start blooming right away, especially when you're in California, and that's gonna just drastically slow down the growth and trunk size of your plant. You know, it's you grafting it too early, you probably have to maybe double how long you wait versus like when you let these rootstocks size up and graft onto it. You know, so that's what I would recommend, is have a bit of patience and kind of let your rootstock age a bit before you graft into any mature scions to it, because you have to know, once you graft onto it, it's going to want to flower, and it's going to want to fruit, you know. And if your rootstock is mature and old enough, you know, it might have to just kind of go through that flowering once, and then the next year it's probably a good size already to let it flower again and then hold fruit. But if you start off on it too young like this, right, it's going to take you so much more time for it to kind of size up where you look at the plant and it's able to hold fruit. And what size of that trunk that should it be when you kind of graft? My recommendation is that, let me guys show you one size. So here's one that's about to get grafted onto next year, and this trunk size right here, I mean, it's about a good 3.5 inches around. You know, it's a good size, maybe close to 4 inches around this trunk size right here. So it's a good size. You have to look at it and say, if it's ready to hold fruit, then that's when you graft on it. You have to be patient too. Like this rootstock, it took me 2 years to get to this size, right? So I got this in 2023. It's a Laverne Manila rootstock. This is 2024 right now. So went through 2 years already in the ground, and next year I am gonna graft onto it, put some different varieties onto it. So you gotta be a bit patient and let the rootstock size up a bit before grafting, and that will significantly help save you time. Because like I said, you're grafting onto it too small, it's going to take that plant just forever to get to the size where it can support a fruit. And with this, it's just, you know, I had to wait 2 years, but it's a good size now for me to graft. And once I graft, you know, it doesn't take it too long to be able to hold fruit, just because of the thickness of the trunk. Alright guys, so those are all my tips. That's not everything, but I hope that helps you guys about do it. I may do one in the future that has to do with showing my grafting techniques, but there's lots of video out there with different grafting techniques that you can kind of find. This is more kind of just an overview of what you need to kind of do to be successful in grafting mangoes here in California. Alright, thanks everyone.